I still remember how confident we were that morning. The kind of confidence that only comes before a good humbling. We'd pulled into the trailhead just after sunrise. The map nailed to the wooden post declaring in big, friendly letters, "Easy 2-mile loop." A perfect warm-up, we thought. We had a cooler waiting back at camp and a whole afternoon to lounge by the lake once we stretched our legs. The air was crisp and sweet with pine, and a few lazy clouds drifted across the mountain ridge to the west. None of us, me, Mark, Jess, or little Robbie, had any inkling that the day ahead would stretch a whole lot farther than 2 easy miles. The first mile felt like exactly what we'd expected. A wide, smooth path wound through aspen and spruce. The forest floor carpeted with ferns, and sunlight dappling through the canopy. Birds were out in force, warblers maybe, or chickadees, and the rhythmic crunch of our boots was the only sound beside them. Jess was snapping pictures of mushrooms. Robbie was trying to spot chipmunks. And Mark was teasing me for bringing a walking stick. I told him, a smart man respects a trail even when it says it's easy. He laughed. I'd regret being right about that. Somewhere around what we assumed was mile 2, the loop split into a fork. One sign pointing left, painted and clean. The other barely legible, its arrow faded to ghost grey. Loop Trail, both read, though the second had something scratched beneath it. Old Route. I suggested turning left toward the fresher sign, but Mark, ever the explorer, wanted to see the scenic overlook mentioned in his dog-eared guidebook. It's just a short detour, he said. We'll be back to camp by lunch. So we followed him. At first, it didn't seem so bad. The path narrowed, weaving between thicker pines and slopes of loose rock, but it was still manageable. Then it started climbing. The temperature rose with the sun, and by mid-morning our shirts clung with sweat. The cheerful birds were gone, replaced by the drone of insects and the dry whisper of the wind through brittle branches. When the trail dipped into a ravine, choked with roots, shows, "We'll cut back around soon." But the map in his hand looked like it had been printed during the Eisenhower administration, and the creases had worn through the part where the trail was supposed to curve back. Jess rolled her eyes. "You mean the part that's missing?" she said, pointing at the hole in the paper. We laughed, nervously at first, because it still felt like we were just a little off course. Nothing a good hunch couldn't fix. It wasn't until the trail began dropping steeply into a canyon that I realized the day was changing from a morning stroll to something else entirely. The descent was brutal. Dust rose in clouds with every step, coating our boots and throats. The trees grew taller and the air cooler, but roots snagged at our ankles and hidden rocks sent us stumbling. Robbie, to his credit, kept up without a complaint, though his face was red and slick with sweat. I could hear the rush of water somewhere below, a creek or maybe a small river, and I suggested following it back, since creeks usually lead toward trailheads. Mark just shook his head, muttering something about staying the course. He'd been quiet for the last hour, a sure sign he was second-guessing himself. When we finally reached the creek, we threw ourselves down on the rocks beside it. The water was shockingly cold, the kind that numbs your hands instantly. We filled our bottles through a filter and just sat there in silence, letting the sound of it wash over us. For a while, it was almost peaceful. The sunlight flickering off the ripples, dragonflies darting in the air. But the peace didn't last long. Across the bank, nailed crookedly to a leaning pine, was a sign. The words were nearly gone, but I could still make out, "Backcountry Trail, 6 miles." My stomach dropped. 6 miles, Jess said. her voice sharp with disbelief. "This is supposed to be a 2-mile loop." Mark just stared at the sign, as though staring long enough might change what it said. Robbie laughed, the way kids do when they're too tired to know how else to react. "Guess we're getting bonus miles," he said. That broke the tension, and before into something else. A kind of grudging acceptance that we were exactly where we were meant to be, lost or not. By late afternoon, the forest had gone quiet, in that particular way it does when the day begins to surrender. The wind softened, and the sun slipped behind the peaks, leaving streaks of amber light filtering through the trees. Our legs were jelly, our water half gone again, and the laughter that had carried us through the worst of it had faded into weary silence. Every now and then, Jess would stop and squint at the trail ahead, as if sheer willpower could make a sign appear. The air had cooled, heavy with the smell of damp earth and pine sap, and the sound of crickets started to rise from somewhere unseen. We reached what looked like a junction, 2 narrow paths splitting through the woods, both equally uninviting. No trail markers, no footprints, no sign of other hikers, just the quiet, deep and still. Mark stood there scratching his chin, and I could tell the day's confidence had drained from him completely. "Left or right?" he asked, though his tone made it clear he didn't have an answer. Jess just gave a tired shrug. Robbie, sitting on a log, was peeling a granola bar wrapper with shaking hands. "Whichever one goes downhill," I said finally. Downhill usually means civilization. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. We took the right fork, heading down a rocky slope that twisted through a dense stand of spruce. Each turn looked the same as the last, and a creeping thought started to take hold in my mind. That maybe this wasn't a loop at all. Maybe the 6-mile part wasn't the trail's length, but the distance to somewhere else entirely. Still, I kept that to myself. No sense feeding panic. The light dimmed fast now, shadows pooling underfoot. We tripped more often, boots catching on roots, and the smell of wet moss filled the air. The forest began to feel closer, like it was pressing in around us. At one point, Mark stopped dead in his tracks and pointed ahead. "Look, sign," he said. We'd never again trust a trail described as easy, and whether the park rangers secretly enjoyed watching city folk wander into their little mazes of misdirection. When the first stars began to show through the treetops, I finally stopped and turned around. "All right," I said breathless. "Either we make camp soon, or someone's going to drop." No one argued. We found a flat patch of ground beside a half-dry creek bed, cleared a few sticks, and started setting up what gear we had. The forest around us came alive again, the chorus of night insects, the soft hoot of an owl somewhere far off. We'd been walking since morning, expecting to be back by lunch. Now, with darkness settling in and our stomachs growling, it was clear we weren't just lost. We were learning the hard way that nature doesn't care much for human assumptions. The fire was a stubborn thing that night. The wood was damp from the creek, and the flame hissed and spat like it resented the effort. Mark crouched beside it, coaxing it to life with the last few scraps of dry bark he could find, while Jess and Robbie huddled close, rubbing their hands together for warmth. I sat back on my pack, letting my legs stretch out in front of me. My knees throbbed, and every muscle in my body felt like it had been wrung dry. Still, there was a kind of peace in it, the quiet of the forest at night, the faint trickle of the creek, the slow flicker of orange light reflecting off our tired faces. We were no longer hikers on an easy trail. We were just 4 souls out in the woods, making do. Dinner was a sad combination of crushed trail mix, 2 granola bars, and half a bottle of lukewarm water. Robbie tried to make a joke about fine wilderness dining, but even his grin sagged halfway through. Jess, ever the practical one, said, "We'll find the real loop in the morning. It can't go on forever." None of us said what we were thinking, that for all we knew, we'd wandered miles off any marked trail by now. The map had long since lost its authority, and the GPS back at camp might as well have been on the moon. When the fire finally caught steady, we all sat watching it in silence. The night sounds grew loud. Set out looking for a quick morning loop, and instead found ourselves guests of the wilderness. Uninvited, but not unwelcome. The trees didn't care how lost we were. They'd seen it before. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke to the faintest hint of dawn, just a pale grey light filtering through the branches. The air was cold and still. Mark was already up, poking at the ashes of the fire, his breath rising in thin clouds. He handed me a canteen. "We'll get back today," he said quietly, as if speaking too loudly might offend the forest. I nodded. My legs ached at the thought of standing, but the promise of finding the trail again was enough to get me moving. We packed quickly, left no trace but the ashes, and set off into the morning mist, the trees swallowing us once more. There was no chatter now, just the soft rhythm of boots on damp earth, and the quiet determination that comes after a long night of reflection. Somewhere out there, the easy 2-mile loop waited to be found. Or maybe we'd just keep walking until the forest decided to give us back. The morning air was cool and sharp, carrying that clean scent of dew and pine needles that only comes after a restless night in the woods. A low fog clung to the ground, softening the outlines of the trees so the world looked like it had been half erased. We followed what we hoped was still a trail, though it was barely more than a faint ribbon of packed soil cutting through the undergrowth. None of us spoke much. It wasn't anger or fear anymore, just quiet endurance. The kind that settles in once the worst has passed, and all that's left to do is keep putting one foot in front of the other. After about an hour, we came across an old wooden bridge spanning a trickling stream. It looked ancient. Boards warped and grey, handrails half rotten. But the moment I saw it, I knew we were close to something familiar. Civilization leaves traces. Cut lumber, tool marks, the unmistakable geometry of human hands. We crossed carefully, each plank creaking underfoot. And on the other side, the path began to widen. Within minutes, the trees thinned, and the forest opened onto a gravel road. That got a laugh from all of us. The kind that starts weak and builds until it's real. The kind that comes from shared suffering, turned into something you'll remember fondly later. When we finally rolled back into camp, the cooler was still half full of melting ice, and we tore into sandwiches like we'd crossed a desert. Every bite tasted better for having earned it. Sitting there, feet bare and aching, I watched the wind stir the lake and thought about how easily we trusted those simple words. Easy loop. Maybe that was the real trick of it. Sometimes the trail gives you exactly what you didn't ask for, and that's where the story lives. That evening, as the sun dropped low and the fire crackled again, we retold the day's adventure with new embellishments, each of us the hero in our own version. The frustration had faded, replaced by that quiet gratitude that only comes after a challenge. I looked around at my friends, muddy, blistered, exhausted, and felt that familiar warmth rise in my chest. Out there, away from everything, laughter and hardship walk the same path. We came for a short hike, but left with something better. A reminder that the best memories are often born from the miles you never planned to walk.